Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. For this episode, I'm joined by composer Peter Boyer, and what you can hear now is the opening of his Rhapsody in Red, White and Blue, which is performed by Geoffrey Beagle on piano and the London Symphony Orchestra. I hope you enjoy listening to my conversation with Peter Boyer. So we last spoke, Peter, in November 2022.
Time flies.
Doesn't it just? And
Does.
I don't think we could see the end of lockdown at that point. I think we were still kind of, suffering with it a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
But now we're more into the post-pandemic period, thankfully.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining me once again on Harmonious World. It's a real pleasure to have you again.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And this is absolutely beautiful. So this is your Rhapsody in Red, White and Blue. Am I right in thinking it's a piano concerto, essentially?
Essentially, yes. It's a sort of moderately short piano concerto in all but name, but of course the name was dictated to me by the soloist. So yes, it's a rhapsody, but it falls in that piano concerto category as a kind of short one. Yes.
Yes, but it's absolutely stunning. And of course, it was recorded here in London with the LSO.
Yes. And an incredible experience once again. And when we spoke last time, it was around my last full album with the LSO, Balance of Power. So this gave me an opportunity to go back to London, in this case with Geoffrey, with the soloist, and to record with the LSO again, only about a year and a half or so from the previous time. So it was really lovely to come back relatively quickly compared to having multiple years between projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we can talk about the LSO, but Geoffrey Beagle does a fantastic job, doesn't he, with the
He
piano?
does. He does indeed. He's quite the virtuoso and quite an energetic fellow in many ways.
I can imagine. I've seen some of the photographs taken during the recording process, and it looked like it was a properly energetic in the real sense of the word experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So happy to hear that you're enjoying the new recording.
Oh, I love it. Really love it. So, why did you decide that you were going to do this?
Well, so this was completely and totally Geoffrey Beagle's project in terms of its origins. And he actually had approached me 4 years ago, at this point, just slightly more than 4 years ago, at the beginning of 2020. And so he was at that moment looking ahead to what would be the centennial of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. So Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue premiered in New York City on February 12th, 1924. So he was 96 years from its premiere when he got in touch with me about this, and he said, looking ahead to early 2024, that he knew everybody would be playing Rhapsody in Blue for its centennial. But his idea was that he wanted to celebrate that centennial in a different way by having a living American composer write a new piece, a kind of companion piece, a sort of tribute piece, if you will. And so he even had the title chosen, and he wanted to keep it under wraps at that point. He said, I want it to be called Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue. And so I had mixed emotions about it because on the one hand, I thought this is a very cool idea for a project. It will definitely get a lot of attention. It's a clever title with a lot of meaning behind it as an American. But I also thought this is very, very daunting as an American composer because Rhapsody in Blue is beloved and unique and iconic. And if I do this, then I'm asking myself to compare my piece to Gershwin, which is a kind of incomparable piece. So I thought it was a huge challenge, and he actually had to really twist my arm to convince me to do it, but he did.
And it's a stunning piece of music that stands alone, regardless of its relationship to the Gershwin original.
Thank you. Well, that is the result we were hoping for, but it was a long journey. It was quite a challenge to write this piece, I must say.
Right. So when did you record it?
So we recorded it at the end of November 2023 in one 4 hour session with the LSO at Air Studios. And we were able to do a fast turnaround because it was not a full album. It's a sort of
Yeah.
an EP, so it's a 17 and a half minute track. And we wanted to be able to get it done and released by Naxos Records in time for the actual Gershwin centennial, which is what we did. So we did it just in time, essentially, to get that accomplished.
Right. And to do that in 4 hours is incredible. I mean, the LSO, they can read anything, can't they?
They can, and not only read it, but read it with with style and panache and personality. So yes, I mean, we knew that that's about the time frame that it would take to do this. It's one session, and we worked with again Simon Rhodes, who is one of the great producers, both of classical recordings and also film scores, very much in demand. And I was really happy that we were able to get him. And yeah, I mean, we were able to proceed at a pretty quick pace, as you can imagine, but also we had enough time. I mean, I think we had 20 or 25 minutes left in the session, which is really something because they do read it so beautifully. So you can get two or three takes of each section with no problem and try a couple slightly different things. It was really great fun.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Did you conduct it?
I did, and Jeffrey performed it. And what's interesting is that Jeffrey had already been performing the piece on an almost weekly basis since the summer of 2023 when it was premiered, because he's worked so hard to get this booked in all the states in the country, in the U.S., I should say. And so what was interesting was that he had already performed the piece live quite a few times, but I had not conducted it at all until the session. So it was a kind of new and fresh and challenging experience for me. And it was the first time that I was on the podium with Jeffrey, the soloist, on the piano. Subsequently, we've done one concert together here in the US, but he keeps playing it with a different orchestra, about 3 times a month. And so he's working with a lot of different conductors, but it was very special for me to be on the podium myself for this recording.
Yeah, fantastic. I took part in some recordings at Abbey Road with Michael Shapiro,
Oh,
and
wow.
he described himself as a human metronome at times because when you're working with a really proficient orchestra and a soloist who really knows their stuff, you're really just keeping time because they're just getting on with reading and playing what is written.
Yeah, yeah, and in this case, there's a lot of fast, rhythmic, jubilant music, and then of course there's also, by contrast, a big, slow lyrical section where one can, relax a little bit more and be a little bit more flexible with the tempos. But yeah, the LSO are just incredible as far as sight reading and doing it in a very stylistically accurate way. And it's interesting because this is I think clearly American sounding music, but of course, there's a great history of American composers recording with the great British orchestras, and they have a fluency in that I think you can hear right from the first bar.
Absolutely. And I think that's really interesting that if you look back over that 100 years between Gershwin and you, that there's a special relationship in music between our two countries that I don't think it's really replicated anywhere else. I think it's a very special relationship.
Yes, and the composers whom I have greatly admired and from whom I have learned so much. I mean, if we think about Aaron Copland and Leonard Bernstein and John Williams, who, is still with us and still producing wonderful music, in his 90s, all of those three composers, among others, have had these relationships. And, Copland, who, of course, was so crucial in establishing kind of American orchestral sound. He recorded with American orchestras and he recorded with British orchestras and he recorded with the LSO. And so, yeah, there is definitely that special relationship that I feel happy to be a small and humble part of.
And although there are classical classical composers who use an orchestra, I think one of the biggest uses of London recording studios orchestrally is for film music. So
Absolutely.
much of it is recorded here.
It's true. I mean, and there are multiple reasons for that. I mean, there's more than one great orchestra in London, of course, and that's part of it. And the quality is very high, and there are at least a couple, great world-class studios. I mean, Abbey Road Studio One and Air Studios that can accommodate a large orchestra for orchestral recording. But also, it's important that the London orchestras have in their sort of business model, they have a way of working in sessions in their very busy schedules amongst their concert work, and they're designed and set up to do that. And that certainly is a big part of it. And of course, they're very much in demand, but their adaptability in their schedule to accommodate these kinds of projects is very important as well.
Yeah, and especially you talk about adaptability, and I think especially in terms of whatever orchestra you need, the LSO or the RPO can do it. And if it's a small one, they'll just take the first seat of each instrument or whatever it is, or whoever's available. And I think they really have got it down to a fine art now, that commercialization of music.
Yeah, and reading the terrific book that was written a number of years ago about the LSO's centennial or centenary, there's quite a lot of interesting material in there about how historically over the decades the LSO has balanced this kind of recording work with its concert work, and that's always been part of its ethos and how it works from the beginning. So yeah, indeed, and the LSO I've recorded actually. This was my fifth recording in London, and so I've done three albums with the LSO, and then I did one with the LPO, the London Philharmonic, and one with the Philharmonia, partially because over these years I've wanted to just experience these different London orchestras whose recordings I have admired so much, and I feel very fortunate to have had different opportunities to record with them. And of course, the majority of my work comes from American orchestras in terms of commissions and in terms of performances. So I feel fortunate to be involved and kind of have a foot in both of those worlds, the American and the British, at least in some sense.
Yeah. So talk to me about this 50 states with 50 different orchestras that Jeffrey Beagle is doing. Is that working out?
It is. It's a long process, but it's really quite remarkable because when he approached me about this project again in early 2020, it was so ambitious in more than one sense. Just the musical idea was ambitious, but that was going to fall on me to actually execute what he had in mind. But the even more ambitious project was to try to get the piece performed in at least in every state by at least one orchestra. So I really, honestly, I was very skeptical, and I thought, well, maybe he'll get 25 or 30 states involved. That's kind of insane goal
Yeah.
to achieve. But he was very, very persistent and believed very strongly in this. And gradually he did get to this point. I mean, early on, orchestras that were signing on without having heard any of the music. In fact, Jeffrey hadn't heard any of the music. So the first maybe at least 15 or more orchestras, they were doing it completely on faith, if you will, that I was going to deliver something. And then eventually, I was able to finish the piece, and then we're going to have more sign on. But as we speak today, there are 54 orchestras in all 50 states that have signed on. And just as of this past week, Jeffrey has performed it. It's been performed 27 times. And I think he's done 18 or 19 states. So there are a couple states where we have more than one orchestra in a state. But he does, in fact, have this committed. And through all of next season, the 2024-25 season, he'll be playing it quite a lot. And even into the 25-26 season. So we still have more than a dozen orchestras that have signed on and said, yes, we'll do this, but that have yet to schedule their dates. So I think it'll probably take him until the summer of 2026, by which point I think he will have covered all. And we're actually getting more inquiries since the recording has come out. So it's definitely possible that we'll get more than 54. It might even come up close to 60 orchestras, which is for a new piece for soloist and orchestra. We both believe this is pretty unprecedented. Neither of us has heard of a new piece for soloist and orchestra getting this many performances in this many states. So we're very pleased about that, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. And there must be something about that combination. So Jeffrey's piano playing, your composition, and also the homage that it pays to the Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, I assume that Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue is also extremely popular in the UK,
Oh
but
yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, I probably worldwide, but yes, in the US, I mean, it's hard to think of a more iconic piece of music, and it is so special in the way that it bridges the gap, if you will, between classical and jazz. I mean, these are very, very big terms that are, very subject to discussion, but it's unique and it's beloved. And so it always is a hit with orchestras if you have a great pianist, which Jeffrey is. And yeah, the combination has proven very powerful, which is what we both imagine would happen. And in almost all these cases, the orchestras are doing both my piece and the Gershwin on the same program. There's a handful, maybe even less than a handful, where they're just doing my piece. But for the most part, it's a great thing to have,
Yeah.
both Rhapsodies. And most of these concerts are ending with Rhapsody in Blue because, it's just a fantastic way to end a concert. So sometimes it's my piece right before the Rhapsody in Blue. That's been happening as a very cool second half for a program. Or sometimes Jeffrey's been playing my piece on the first half and then the Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue on the second half with other American repertoire. So that's great. And also, it really runs the gamut in terms of the size of the orchestras, budget-wise. So we've got a few big orchestras, like the Utah Symphony premiered it, and Jeffrey's about to play it with the Buffalo Philharmonic and Pacific Symphony in Southern California, big budget orchestras. But also there are regional orchestras and small budget orchestras, even community orchestras, and even 3 or 4 youth orchestras. So we're really embracing a big range of budgets and of levels of experience. And that's also pretty special because to think that you will have, for example, the Seattle Youth Symphony Orchestra, which is terrific in the Pacific Northwest, they'll play the piece in the fall. That's also very nice, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, I have a question to ask you. When you are asked by a soloist to produce something, to compose, when they hear it, so do you play it to them, or do you give them the music and get them to play it first?
Well, in this case, my current writing process for quite a while uses Sibelius software, music notation software, which has pretty great playback capabilities. And also I have some really fantastic sample libraries, including a solo piano sound that is a solo piano that is a Yamaha CFX that was recorded in Abbey Road Studio One in and of itself. So my piano
Oh,
skills are quite good. And then I use Vienna Symphonic Library samples for all of my orchestral stuff. So I'm able to, as I write and when I get further into the orchestration process, when it's very detailed, I'm actually able to have quite an elaborate playback demo of sections of the piece and then eventually the entire piece, so that if one hears the demo, as I was able to share with conductors, it's really remarkably close. It's not the LSO, but it's really close to what the final product will be. So that's extremely helpful for a soloist and or for an orchestra. But in this case, because it was for Jeffrey and it was a unique project and it was challenging in terms of style and what I would do, what I decided to do is I wrote significant chunks of the piece before I played anything for Jeffrey. So when Jeffrey heard it for the first time, it was most definitely not complete, and it was some of it was orchestrated and some of it was not yet orchestrated. It was just piano. But what I did is I played for him about 6 or 7 chunks of material that would eventually become the piece. And so I was able to get his feedback well along in the process, but I didn't want to show things prematurely. I wanted to have quite a lot of it figured out before I showed it to him. And so what we were able to do in this case was to just have him respond to the solo material and in a very, very small way, tweak just a little bit of it. I mean, I think we agreed that probably 98 or 99% of what I wrote, he kept. So there was just a little bit of finessing, maybe leaving out a note in a chord here or altering a single note here in a run, something like that. But for the most part, he kept what I did. And then, of course, I've got it played back by, software, and then it has to go into the hands of a real human being. And then we finesse it and figure out if something needs to be changed. Because, of course, when you're having software play it, I can just say, we're going to play it at this very fast tempo.
yeah.
And it's no problem. And a human being has to then learn it at that tempo and tell you, can I play it at the, at 120 or does it have to be 112? Beats per minute. So we had a little bit of that back and forth, but the software helps, especially because I am not a virtuoso pianist. I played in every single note of the piece via my keyboard to the computer both the solo part and the orchestral music, but I am not capable of playing this at tempo. I can play the slow section a bit. That's about it.
But that's why you're a composer, not a virtuoso pianist.
Right, right. And yes, that word virtuoso is important because I wanted this to be, a concerto or a rhapsody in that sense that it would really allow Jeffrey to have a vehicle for his virtuosity. I mean, the Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue is extremely difficult to play, technically very, very difficult. And probably my Rhapsody is not at that level technically, but there are a few spots that are quite tricky. So it required someone with a really very strong technique. And that's part of my job in this case was to give him something to allow his virtuosity to shine. And then I think also by contrast, in the slow and lyrical section, which probably is my favorite section of the piece, it's not about virtuosity, but it's about beautiful tone and beautiful playing. And that's something that he does very well also. And, because I think I have an affinity for doing that kind of thing with the orchestra, I worked very hard in that slow lyrical section to find the right balance between the solo part and the orchestral material so that they could really live together in a way that I thought would work. And I worked at that for quite a long time.
Yeah, well, it shows. It's a beautiful piece. It always it amazes me. One of the things I love about music is how we can use tools like you were talking about Sibelius.
Yes,
It doesn't detract from your composition technique, but it is a tool that makes it a lot easier because if you want to change a B to an A, you just move it down. You don't have to
that's
kind of
right.
use a rubber and then,
That's right.
start again kind of thing. So
Right. I mean, when I was first starting as a composer as a teenager, I did do things by hand and certainly through my later 20s, still did things by hand. And I still once in a while will pick up a piece of manuscript paper and a pencil just to sort of feel the old-fashioned putting it down. There's something about that that feels like a composer, especially when one looks at manuscripts throughout history, or, for example, even Copland, to look at the way Copland wrote on the page is very informative. However, you really can't beat the fact that once you can play in notes, it can play back for you and you can manipulate them. And as you say,
yeah,
you can add notes, you can subtract notes, you can change voicings, you can change the tempo. And especially when I want to start to orchestrate, if I have all of the material as a piano sketch, I can then start to paste these things into my woodwinds, into my brass, into my strings, and hear those sounds played back to me. And it's not the same as a real orchestra, but it's a wonderful tool. And so since these tools exist, I think it makes sense to take advantage of them in the composition process.
definitely. So what's the next project you're working on?
So I am working on two different, very big commissions for the 250th anniversary of the United States of America, which is in 2026. And neither of those have yet been announced, so I can't say what they are. They will be announced sometime next year, I think. But definitely have my hands full, and I can say that I'll be very fortunate to have some of the most famous and greatest orchestras in the US premiering these big new works in 2026. So I've got two projects that are going to proceed in parallel for the next couple of years. And I'm definitely going to have my hands full. So I'm pretty excited about that.
That sounds wonderful. What a great thing to be involved in.
Yes, very, very much so. As an American composer, it's going to be a rather major anniversary in this country in 2026. So there's going to be quite a lot of new music that will be premiered, no doubt. But as a kind of American sounding composer, if you will, I've been finding that I have actually more offers for commissions than I'm able to take, which is I think, a great problem to have. So I've got a lot to do.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. Well, come and talk to me about that when you can.
Yes, I'd love to.
Yeah,
And
brilliant.
thank you so much for your kind words about the Rhapsody, and I hope that your listeners will enjoy it as well.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate your time.
All right, Hillary, nice to see you again.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Harmonious World and my conversation with Peter Boyer. What you're listening to is the end of his Rhapsody in Red, White and Blue. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Harmonious World. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.